Now, I don't know if you've ever looked at plants this way, but plants are pretty amazing because they can make their own food. That's right, they make their own food. Plants contain chlorophyll, which lets them use light from the sun to make everything they need using a number of chemical building blocks. The building blocks that plants need in the greatest quantities are carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And they get these from the carbon dioxide in the air and from the water in the soil. You've heard about how plants consume carbon dioxide, greenhouse gases, right? But while carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen are needed in the greatest quantities, there are about 15 other building blocks that plants need to grow. And they have to get these either directly from the soil or they can get carried in because they're dissolved in the water that gets brought into the plant. Now, the three most important building blocks after carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen are nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. These are the N, which is the chemical symbol or abbreviation for nitrogen, the P, which is the chemical symbol for phosphorus, and the K, which is the chemical symbol for potassium. Don't ask me why it's a K. These are the big three, and our plants need these building blocks to prosper. Depending on the composition of the soil we have, right, which is the balance between sand, silt, clay, and compost, which I talk about in a different video, as well as the soil pH, these building blocks may already be present, or you may need to add them for best results. Now, if there aren't enough of any of these building blocks in the soil, our plants won't be able to grow as well as we want them to. Now, to add or supplement these materials so our plants can use them, we can add fertilizers. And every fertilizer you can buy tells us the ratio of nitrogen to phosphorus to potassium, of N to P to K. Each of these building blocks serves a slightly different but really important purpose. Nitrogen is needed for green growth of our plants, the leaves and stems, And while nitrogen is good, too much nitrogen can cause excessive leaf and stem growth while slowing down flowering and fruiting in your plants. I had my soil tested a few years ago and learned that my garden soil had too much nitrogen. This made complete sense to me because my leafy lettuce plants do really, really well, but my tomato and pepper plants always grow really big, except that the fruit seems to come in late. Now, if your soil is low in nitrogen, the lower, older leaves of your plants may turn yellow, although this is natural for some plants anyways. Phosphorus is important for cell division, and that's for the growth that happens at the very tops and the very bottoms of your plants, which makes phosphorus important throughout the plant's life, but especially during flowering and fruiting. Now, if your soil is low in phosphorus, your plants may end up smaller than you expect them to be. Now, potassium is needed for root growth and for resistance to disease and wilting if there isn't much water around, but it also helps with flowering. Now, after I built my first raised bed, I filled it with a 50-50 mixture of soil and compost, thinking compost was, the more the better. And I didn't realize that my compost was really high in nitrogen. Now, I also fertilized all my plants that first year with Miracle-Gro all-purpose fertilizer every couple of weeks, which also has a lot of nitrogen. Now, the lettuce plants I grew that year were amazing. They got huge. But the tomato plants I grew got huge, really tall, giant leaves, but they took a long time to flower and set fruit. That was because my soil had too much nitrogen. Now, if you listen to everyone who champions the methods of gardening organically, they recommend that you feed your soil and then you let your soil feed your plants. And while I generally agree with this approach, I also think it's okay to supplement or add fertilizers, right, to improve what's in the soil once in a while to give your plants a boost as you work towards getting the perfect soil in your garden. Now, I expected that all commercial growers would use organic methods, but I was surprised to learn that none of the companies that grow these plants on a large scale, the plants we buy at the garden center, none of them grow their plants organically. That's right, none of them use organic gardening methods. They use water-soluble fertilizers, and they create an artificially ideal set of growing conditions to speed up plant growth so they can bring their plants to market faster, right? Make money. But let's get back to our gardens where we have control of things. Nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium are building blocks that plants need in pretty large amounts. But there are also other building blocks that plants need in smaller quantities. These are And you don't have to remember all this stuff. Calcium, magnesium, sulfur, boron, copper, iron, manganese, molybdenum, nickel, zinc, and chloride. And most of these are present in our soils naturally, so we don't have to worry too much about them. A lot of general fertilizers contain a mixture of these building blocks as well. Check the label to be sure. Now I try to be as organic as possible with my garden, and to do this, I add a layer of compost to my soil every year and dig it into my garden beds, when I turn them over. I also supplement my soil with slow-release fertilizers every 2 to 4 years to build the health of my garden soil. I add manganese green sand, which grabs onto nutrients and makes them available to our plants, rock phosphate, which is a source of phosphorus, and potash, which is a source of potassium. I also add lime to counteract the acidity of the pine needles that make it into my compost pile. And when I use fertilizers, I add a high nitrogen fertilizer early in the growing season when the plants are young, and then I switch over to a lower nitrogen fertilizer when I want to promote flowering and setting fruit later in the season. Now, one other thing that's very important to your plants is the pH of your soil. A pH of 7 is neutral, but most plants have an easier time grabbing nutrients out of the soil if the pH is a little below 7 or slightly acidic, because more things can dissolve in water if the pH is a little acidic. Somewhere in the pH around 6.5 is a general guideline to follow. But if the pH gets too low, that's not good either, because your plants won't be able to grab the nutrients that they need from the soil. Now look at the info that comes with the seeds or the plants that you buy, and it'll usually tell you the best pH for that particular plant. Now, the best way to figure out where your soil is and what you need to do to supplement it is to have your soil tested. You can get in touch with your local extension service, and I have a link below so that you can find one near you. They'll give you instructions on how to take a good soil sample, and they'll send you a report with recommendations on what you can do to improve your soil so that it's well balanced for the plants you want to grow. You can apply fertilizers at an appropriate time to give your garden a boost. You can have your soil tested at the beginning of the growing season before you get started, or you can have it tested in the fall so that you can use this information and you know what you need to do in the spring.